Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to do time temporalities, but there was a question that seemed to be, it was a hovering one, was about linearity and the linearity of writing. And if I remember well, but please correct me if I'm wrong, how could writing be other than linear? If writing is too much and not enough, how else could we write the research? Can anyone remember that question?
I think that was Sylvia's question, if she's in here.
Yeah, Sylvia's here.
Well, it came out of our group. I'm not going to own it totally. But yeah, I think, and if I can remember, we were talking about the problems of writing, of how, I mean, that is how research gets communicated. There's still all kinds of other ways, but it always takes shape in a linear way because you read it from beginning to end, and it says, and so the emphasis is on the writing, but it's also not enough. It can't say everything that it could say. It can't give the whole of the picture of the research. And so we were curious about how else could we write or share the research in a way that still is meaningful for others, but how else could it be linear from the beginning? Because you read things from beginning to end. I don't know how to write in a way that actually, in only in words, that actually gives a sense, without it being jumbled, of all these parts moving together rather than here's the beginning, the middle, and the end.
So this is actually a really nice way of starting the session for today, because, you know, time temporalities and especially temporal diffraction really disrupts the kind of, there's a beginning and an end and a middle, and you can do that differently. So Karin Barad does that themselves in several writings. I'm thinking of What Flashes Up, where there is that kind of montaging going on, where you have blocks of text that are diffracting through one another. And I've tried to do this with Joanne Pearce in an article about GoPros, and there we are sort of hopping like it's actually a ball that's bouncing through the text, but of course it's not it is like a ball. But it was interesting because the reviewers were not very happy with it. They just couldn't quite get it. And then the whole thing about, you know, how does it work? It requires a kind of studying rather than just a linear reading. But I'm happy to send it so you can see how the montaging and the way we worked with it in a piece that disrupted how we were reporting on this kind of in a linear way.
Yeah, I've also used montage in quite a few the articles, actually. The one was about touching matters, and we used montage there, and another one was about coloniality and social work, where we used montage. Dorothy, Holscher, and myself. So yeah, if people are interested, I could share those as well.
So we could definitely put those up, and some of them will also be mentioned, you know, when we come to the chapter that was also the reading for today. And I'm just thinking, I've done one with on thinking, Troubling Time with Walter Cohen, where we also do temporal diffraction. I don't know whether that is actually in this chapter, but so there are ways of doing that with blocks of text, but then of course you also have the opportunity to do other kind of texts, which are visual text. But it does require quite a lot of kind of explanation and an effort by the reader. So let's see how that question maybe if we keep that with us as we are progressing through this 1.5 hours together, and then see whether it has been answered at the end. Okay, so here is there's okay, Sally Brown. Some of Candice Kuby's work shows alternative ways of writing up research in early literacies. That's right. Choose your own adventure novels, different routes through the novel. Hannah, I was just going to say, I know someone who did this for their PhD. Oh, wow. And then David writes, this article has a diffractive experiment with montage of fragments. And then there is a link. Aha, creating Edinburgh. Oh, it's with you in it as well, and Claire and David. Oh, fabulous. Thank you. And it's open access. Couldn't be better. So when we now go back to the, whoops, there we go. The reading is, we're going to start with is the entry 65, Timetemporalities. George, would you mind sharing it? And then have we got some volunteers to read out or to start reading out until the diffraction? Not all at the same time.
I can read.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Timetemporalities, Karen Murris and Carol A. Taylor. Chronos is the pervasive adult conception of temporality that takes development and progress as inevitable. This chronological conception of time underpins developmentalism, a measurable, uninterrupted flow of nows. Childhood is usually assumed to be a phase in the human or species life cycle and takes as a given the chronological improvement towards independence, autonomy, and rationality. Humans' ability to look forward has become entangled with what it means to be human, a superior species with agency, consciousness, and intentionality, separating us ontologically from non-humans in the order of things. Reference to Singh 2015, page 21. However, the Anthropocene, dependent on exploiting non-white labor, torn from the ground of existence as energy and treated as matter, Colebrook 2020, compared with the once slow time of geology, Colebrook 2020, reflects the speed with which this superior species is running out of time to rescue its habitat. So please just stop me if anyone wants to say something. Teleological chronos enables treatment of the other than human and less humans as inferior. For example, women, people of color, children living in poverty. Moreover, childhood as a concept also refers to nations, Berman 2008, or whole continents, for example, Africa. The native is treated like a child, an expression of racism, as well as construing childhood as the logic of colonialism, Nandy, 1987. Time and childhood are racialized and intrinsically entangled concepts in colonialism. Although Plato defined chronos as eternity, aion, Aristotle's definition of chronos as a unilinear line of before-after movements, Physics, the 4th to 220a, Murris and Cohen, 2020, established a foothold. Should I read that sentence once more? I do it without the references. So, although Plato defined chronos as eternity, aeon, Aristotle's definition of chronos as a unilinear line of before-after movements established a foothold. Time is experienced as a linearity of successive, consecutive, and irreversible movements dividing past from future. Chronological time is like an arrow in flight towards a more progressed future, further developed and extinguishing childhood. Kennedy and Cohen, 2017. There is no time to be intensely immersed in events, to experience ion, a childlike slowing down of time. To experience eternity, Cohen, 2015. To experience African time. Karin Barad suggests not replacing one sense of time for the other, as this would mean falling into the trap of using a similar discourse of progress, but instead to deconstruct time. Barad, 2018. Their extraordinary scholarship on time disrupt Newtonian assumptions of time as a succession of evenly spaced moments or as an external parameter that tracks the motion of matter in pre-existing space. Each moment is an infinite multiplicity within a given singularity. Space and time are not concepts existing independently of humans, as Aristotle thought, nor are they categories of the human mind, as Kant thought. In agential realism, time and space are material discursive and interactively produced. Time does not exist as a universal outside of matter, but has a history and leaves material traces. Deconstructing discourses of progress and development requires the art of noticing entanglements of bodies with bodies and times with other times. We need to look around rather than ahead to be truly present in colonized spaces. What are the obstacles and opportunities for such childlike ionic research practices in clock-bound academia? How can we provoke researchers into inhabiting multiple temporalities and slowing down time? So,
Is it an idea to pause here for a moment, or what do
Yeah.
you think? Anyone? All clear as crystal, easy peasy. We can go on, and then
Should perhaps we have a different
Hmm?
person read the second part?
yeah. Thank you. And thanks, Sinova.
Or did I just accidentally offer myself?
You did.
Oh, okay, I can do it.
Thank you.
Sure. In the space-time mattering entry of this book, we, Candace and Carol, ponder some of the ways in which Barad's configuring of time, space, and matter produces something profoundly interesting, conceptually and analytically. In undoing the linearity of time, in particular, Barad challenges Western assumptions of progress and instead encourages us to think of time as multiple unfolding. Barad illustrates this via diffractions of Lee Fernandez's analysis of the structural and ideological workings of power in a Calcutta jute mill, which unfolds historical practices, workforce policy, global capitalist modes of production, and the woman's self-perception. Barad 2010 further complicates and undoes the notion of the inexorable forward and linear path of time's arrow by diffracting space-time matterings with Derrida's hauntology and the quantum eraser experiment to propose that the past is not, nor can be, erased, but is materialized in present and future times. Time does not head into the future, but is fractured, turned back on itself, knotted and unfolded in ghostly traces and material matterings. These analytical moves produce time as temporalities plural. They aim to account for matter's dynamism in bodies, spaces, times, practices, doings, and actions, and in the ongoingness of temporal past, present, future entanglements and differentiations. The UK's current post-Brexit movement is one in which multiple temporalities jostle, pull and push together and apart as historical, geographical, regional, economic, and political trajectories clash and collide in particularly noticeable and damaging ways. Barad's 2014 notion of return prompts new passages through theory data. Returns are not a simple going back, but a new aerating, much like the earthworm who tunnels through the soil, opening up new passageways, turning it over, allowing oxygen in. As Bonozo et al. Say, aerating in this sense is a dynamic and generative process of invigorating past, present, future connection. Temporalities plural produces new ways of thinking about mentoring lively materialities.
Wow. Okay. So what we thought might be a good moment is to think we've worked with causality. We thought with now time temporalities, causality, with interaction and diffraction. So, you know, if we put these in conversation with one another, do you sense that there's a resonance, that it's helpful to put them together? Do they help each other in thinking differently about your research? We first of all thought it might be a good idea to open this up, plenary. And then we're going to have a look at some examples of temporal diffraction, and then we're going to go in breakout rooms. Don't know whether that's a good idea. But first of all, maybe diffraction, causality, the way we've been thinking about it together, and interaction, and now this temporalities. Do they sort of converse with one another? What do you think? Why might we have chosen those? It's not a guessing game. It's not that I know the right answer. It's just
I think maybe they're all helpful for thinking about things differently, and maybe all of them have a kind of relational emphasis. So rather than that traditional way of thinking of fixed points in time or fixed ontologies that pre-exist, they're all this kind of relational, feels much more modern in a way of thinking about things. That's how I would see it.
Yeah. And Charlotte, I think interaction and temporality really help each other. Yeah, I would love to hear more.
I get hung up on time a lot, mostly because, again, thinking about that positionality statement I was referring to last week in terms of what becomes most important and when, and it's so difficult to distinguish a start and end point. So when you diffract temporality through a lens of interaction, you see that those things are already occurring. And so you don't need the start and the end point. So that's how I'm thinking with those concepts. But obviously I've said interaction and temporality, but actually that's an act of diffraction as well, isn't it? So
Another?
I was also thinking how the idea of interaction, because at first it got me confused when I read that it's not a doing away of the linear time. But then like after thinking with interaction, then it's like both times, like linear and non-linear interacting. So this is how these two concepts help me.
Cineva, all four concepts also attends to something here and now, staying with it, not necessarily going into this and that, there and then, but staying with the specificities at hand. It's also connected, isn't it? With what you're just saying, Giovanna and Lisa. Oh, Lisa? I think it's also helpful to think about how time, temporality, space are a part of interaction and moving away also from X causes Y, but thinking about everything is interacting across time and space. I suppose for interaction, I have to almost force myself. Yeah, it is a deliberate act to think temporalities, multiple temporalities, rather than it is spatial. Do you also have that? I know that's not the case, but it is very hard to think in terms of multiple temporalities, and especially involving the more than human. So it's really good to put those concepts together, you know, like a cluster.
Is this, Karin, because of almost the way in which time is something we are saturated with, whereas I suppose with online spaces, we are all in very many different spaces, so it's almost easier to accept the multiplicity of space, whereas to think about the multiplicity of time really breaks away with that chronological system with which we live our days. So I am both at work and at home and in South Africa and in lots of other places right now, and I can find that quite easy to accept. But one of the things I share with George on a regular basis, I'm so thankful for George saying we're starting in 30 minutes, because to differentiate the time zones, every time I thought I get it wrong, every time. If it wasn't for George, I would never be here. So shout out to George, because honestly, without you, I have no schedule. That is...
Charlotte, we're not
I
only in
am
different,
Kronos.
Charlotte, we're not only in different spaces, we're also in different times.
Yes, but I find it easier to accept the different space than I do the different time. And I'm just wondering why it is that I can accept this multi-space understanding, and yet the time, I don't know, I can't help but imagine that teachers especially, or teacher educators, we live from term to term, we live to timetables, we live to heavy schedules and workloads that are very much based upon that chronos. But we are also now in these spaces that are multiplicitous just almost naturally. My language here is not communicating what I'm trying to communicate, I don't think.
I feel though that there's certain situations where it's easier to, I wanted to say see, but that also feels like the wrong word. Like when you're in Cape Town and you look at Table Mountain and you think about like what this mountain has seen, and that it's here, and I don't know, or like, I should have thought about this before I said it out loud. I just feel that there's some times where it feels very much like understandable, and then there are other times when it's hard to feel that multiplicity.
Lisa is saying here, is it Lisa or Lisa? Anyway, she's thinking about the climate crisis and how the multiple temporalities really matters. What happened before on the Earth impacts now, impacts future, and what we imagine for the future impacts our now and how we think about the past. And Sally, all of the concepts disrupt binaries and make you think in different ways than we are accustomed to in a traditional sense. And then lots of thank yous to you, George. That's in the chat. So this might well be a good moment, Viv, what do you think, to move to the chapter on temporal diffraction?
Yeah.
And start thinking about it in small groups?
Well, George shared the chapter with all of you. I'm not sure how many of you had the chance to look at it, but we thought it might be helpful because there are many examples of how people took this temporal diffraction up with their research. So Karin and I, after the Barad seminar here, were thinking about how that really brought home to us the notion of temporal diffraction, and how, you know, we had encountered it in the quantum hauntologies in paper, where Barad was also using montage in a way, you know, to talk about temporal hauntology. But they shared the troubling times piece with us, which I felt was very helpful to understand temporal diffraction. And of course, in that piece, they were looking at the novel, which was about, you know, travel hopping, and looking at how the nuclear bomb had affected, you know, people across times and spaces. And I was just thinking when we were talking that often Barad says that it's phenomena that bring space and time into being rather than them existing in a sort of container. So yeah, you know, that Karin and I both spoke about a number of people that we were writing with and working with. And I remember, you know, Sadiq Mutala, who was a PhD student of mine, he has an interesting video on sort of using a similar type of temporal diffraction regarding District 6, which was a place of forced removals in Cape Town. And the actual physicality or the materiality of the ghosts, you know, in the roads and that sort of thing. Because as Barad says, you know, people often refer to humans, but, you know, it's also the land and
What are you buying?
roads. And I don't know what that was. Yeah,
No,
sorry,
it's me. I just tried to
Is
look
it?
for, well, I just tried to look for the YouTube clip, and I'm
Yeah, you could put
share it
a link
now.
there. It's very nice.
I just put
yes.
this clip in
Oh,
there.
you've already done it.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Thank you very much. And yeah, so maybe Karin, you'd like to say something about, and then we were sort of toing and froing about, you know, what temporal diffraction sort of meant for us. So it was a nice, playful chapter, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was fascinating was how the impact it had temporal diffraction, because for me, diffraction was always, you know, it was spatial. And the idea that the now is never the now, but always already the past is threaded through, bleeding through the present and futures too, especially in child research, but much more than that. And especially it completely changed how I thought about decolonization and and the politics of research. And and also the research of my students that either were also at the seminar or were later also got a dose of that. So what we thought would be, so when Karin came to Cape Town, what they very much yeah, which they wanted to see when they were presenting two of their papers is how South Africans would respond to agential realism. But it was much too early, you know, it took us years to really sort of grapple with the difference it would make for research. You know, these things take time. And that's, of course, why the book was written. So I don't know whether people have had opportunity to have a look at it, but it really is like that first, the night sky. And of course, the night sky is not for nothing called that, because the constellation made a huge impact on me. So the idea that the now is like when you look at the night sky, when you look at a constellation and you see the stars, that you see stars that are now, but also you see stars that are dead, right? And you still see them now. And that was just incredibly exciting for also thinking about, you know, hauntology differently and about factors and how hauntology is not just the humans or the human ghost, but what else, you know. And I think, for example, Joanne Pierce's PhD was very much influenced by that idea of the ghosts and the hauntology, and how, you know, wherever we step, when we step on the sand or we touch the water, it is never just there and then, is what Sinova was also just saying in the chat. So yeah, it made a huge impact.
Also the chapter, what flashes up, because I think the constellations also come from that. And it's quite a long chapter, but it's really worth going through. You know, bringing Benjamin's notion of progress as well was helpful.
But I think especially for me, how sort of and that of course was in the glossary as well, you know, how the logic of childhood and the logic of colonialism are going hand in hand because of these notions of temporality. So I put in here in this chapter the temporal diffraction also brings the electrifying insight of adultocentrism, or even misopody involved in the way the human refers to in discourse is the adult human. And I can't emphasize that enough, you know, that when we work with posthumanism, that the human that we want to decenter tends to be the adult human, and we completely forget about the child human, that we shouldn't just brush off. And there's a lot of critique, obviously, from, and quite rightly so, from you know, post-colonial theories, you know, that the human that referred to is not just that doesn't encompasses all humans, but definitely not like indigenous peoples. But also we forget that the human is usually referred to as not the child human. So yeah, it's an incredible, you know, it was electrifying, actually, that kind of insight of it's like thunder had hit me in terms of temporal diffraction and how it completely disrupts the way we think and are and behave in research. Shall we break up? Let me just go back, because I'm staring at this screen now. So it might be that you all have got your hands up and are dying to speak. Yeah, Berlin?
Yeah, I was just wanted to you were talking about how really interesting that, you know, it's not just the disruption of the human adult. We're thinking of the human adult, but there's also the human child. And in that sense, and this is more of a thought, perhaps even a question, could it be then it's a disruption of what we've come to know as the norm, or disruption of power itself rather than the human? The human in this case happened to be, but is it the human, or is it the power and the normalization that has been attached to a particular body or thought?
Yeah, because I would say that it's also non-human animals, you know, that have been elided, and it extends to all sorts of other forms of thought. So, I mean, Braidotti always talks about how there's the specific human, you know, that is always assumed. And of course, Sylvia Winter, who we tried to read in a reading group, but who's quite difficult to read, also talks about man as that specific man with a capital M, that specific human that is assumed.
That's true, but in the list of categories, Braidotti also doesn't talk about child or age. And I think that is very important in early childhood education, or education and childhood studies, child studies. And it is extraordinary, actually, that all those feminist philosophers actually don't talk about children or child. So I write about that as the missing peoples of post-humanism, right? But I think what we can do is shall we go into something in chat, or disability? Yeah, but Braidotti does talk about disability, and when you look at all the list, usually and then etc. comes, age is usually not in it as a category of exclusion. Not yet.
So I've created breakout rooms and people can join.
Great.
There is a
so the idea is to think about, you know, these readings and how it pertains to your own research. And we'll spend about 20 minutes or so in breakout rooms, and then come back and have a plenary discussion.
Can I just say that there's an interesting question by Angela. Is child not also developmental temporality, and does this also need disrupted? And I think it's like the human, whether the child, you know, we wouldn't have, it's like these Derrida and pairs, you know, we wouldn't have child without human, probably, would be, yeah, because it's a young human. But it is whether we think of child as a phase in a human's life, and ideally they have to move out to and grow out from as soon as possible in order to be a fully human, or whether it also has qualities like Ion that we were reading, you know, childlike, a childing way of becoming in the world. And it's something that we don't grow out of, you know, so could child, rather than getting rid of it, child or childing, could it work as a concept in a very affirmative and productive way to challenge the way we as adult humans are behaving in the world or in research? Perhaps a fold, yeah. A manifold. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, yeah, so let's do what Viv suggested. Hi, Hill. You know,
Heather.
putting that reference in the chat
Okay.
because it's,
I'm just going to see if I can find the book on my shelf so that I can give it to you properly.
yeah, okay, great. Thanks. Right, welcome back. So I have to leave to attend. Yeah, the other people have had to leave as well. Viv, are you? I
Yeah.
can't remember what we said. I think you.
Yeah,
Would you mind?
not at all. So maybe if we could, anyone wants to raise anything of what happened in their group? What you spoke about? Some people were rudely interrupted in mid-sentence in the group I was in. So,
In ours as well.
really,
Yeah.
anyone who'd like to bring anything to the plenary? I'm sure there were a lot of interesting conversations.
Mm.
Are people able to raise their hands? Because I know I've tried sometimes and not been able to.
I can't see it either. I usually
I've
just
never been able to see it on this thing.
It's in the React button. So if you click on React
React.
and then just up, there's the option to raise hand. But it used to be that raise hand was separate.
Recognize hand gestures. It doesn't give me the. It
Oh.
says play chime for raised hands, which I don't know
Viv,
what
if
that
you
means.
don't push the little up arrow, just push on the whole button that has the heart on it.
Oh,
open reactions
okay.
now, but it doesn't give.
Okay, I see it now. I see it now.
But I can't see my hand up.
Do you have your hand up?
No.
Well, if
No,
you
but I mean-
if you press on the heart, it gives you all a number of different options. I'm just looking for anyone who has their hand up.
Oh, it is there indeed, the raise
Yeah,
hand.
that's right.
Oh, is that what you can
Yeah.
do? Okay, right. Okay. Now I can see. This is new.
So, who'd like to share?
Well, what worked really well last time was working on the whiteboard. Maybe we
Yeah,
should.
it did. Do people want to write something on the whiteboard? Yeah, that might
do
be
that.
nice. Let's
was
do
really
that.
good.
I'm putting some shapes and things to feel free to add text.
Thanks, Hill.
Oh, yeah, that's a very nice book, actually.
It's a wonderful book.
Quite
You have
old
got
now, but
you haven't got a copy of it through the special site.
I'll have a look and see.
Okay, thanks. It's referred to a lot, eh?
It really explains in great detail how psychological testing, IQ testing, developmental norms, and the production of those norms have produced a particular version of development. So I think you'd really be interested in it, Karen.
Yeah, I will be. Yeah, very much so. Hmm.
You've got many words, 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 words.
They've gone to the
Stop
right. no?
writing. Yeah.
So pretty.
Is it just deliberately put out of sight or half out of sight?
Well, you can make it smaller and then see the whole thing.
Oh, wait a
But you
minute.
mean the
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. No,
Yeah.
no, I didn't mean to do that. There's
I'm
always
just wondering, you know, about the stop writing and the words, 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 words.
Bye,
Whether
Giovanna.
they are related.
Mm. Maybe some people can talk to what they've
Yeah.
written.
Anyone want to talk to the stop writing and words, 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 words?
Okay, so but it's a bit difficult to talk without words. So I'm afraid I'm still going to have to use words, and they're still going to come one after the other. But in the
Nice.
book that we're working on with at a child becoming literate, we're contemplating refusing to date the data because we don't want the child to be viewed of, if anybody, to construct a kind of linear sequence of this child's development. You know, we think that the minute you start putting dates on, people start reading it in terms of developmentalism. And we just want a period of time, and this is what happened in this period of time. And in any case, a lot of what happens is recursive. It doesn't happen at a one moment. It happens again and again. So they can make what they want of it. It happened between the child was 4 to 9. Doesn't matter exactly what date. So we're playing with the idea of refusing to date our data.
Piaget would not be impressed.
Who Piaget? No, Piaget. That's a compliment. Thanks, Viv.
Yeah.
And
You'd have-
I was in the group with Hill, and what I suggested, or what we do a lot, or we didn't. Oh, Giovanna is already gone. In a paper with Giovanna, and that we do a strike through anything that dates the child. So, like the 7-year-old, and then strike through.
Anyhow, I've heard that, Karen. I'll think about it, but I think they can do what they like with it. It happened in this chronological period of time, and the sequence doesn't really matter.
But isn't the chronological period of time also, you know, buying into some form of sort of linear?
I think it is.
Because I mean, what happened before that chronological period and after it is also, you know, very relevant.
Absolutely. And although,
so why even mention the chronological period?
Okay, that's also interesting, because although we stopped collecting data from this particular child, we haven't stopped knowing the child. And we can't pretend that we're not influenced by, we can't pretend that the what we're seeing in the past isn't happening in the now and in the future. You know, we can see it repeating itself in different ways. I think that's quite a nice idea, Viv. Because if you're thinking about a child becoming literate, it doesn't stop when you end your data collection. You know, we're all becoming literate all of the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anybody who's tried to read Barad will understand that they have to become more literate than they were before.
Well, literate in a particular way, yeah.
Differently literate.
Yeah.
But I think also of, you know, when you talk about the data as if it's there, out there, but it is
Oh,
how the data is produced in a material discursive way, right? So that is already the concepts we work with and the binaries we think with is already producing these, what counts as data.
Yeah, and
in
we're
becoming
producing it in the
literate.
now. We're producing
Yeah.
it in the now again.
Yeah.
And when people read the book, they're going to be dealing with it in their now, in the future. You know, it's not bound by
Yeah.
specific spatio-temporal relations. It moves around.
Each time you return to the data, it's different.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
never a given.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I see this question here, and maybe it would interest you, Karin. It says, is Chronos and Aeon a binary?
Well, I think if I go back to that, it's not one or the other. That it's not like, and that's also something I really learned from that workshop, was that it's not like chronological time, linear time is, we need to chuck it out and then replace it by another form of time, because that would already assume that that will be better. And then Karin was very clear about, agential realism is not sort of, we're doing it better and we chuck everything out, because that's impossible, the impossibility. So it is both and Chronos and Ion at the very same time. So when I really talk about chronological children, because there are, when we work with the flashy chronological children, that's what we work with. But when you think about a child's being in the world, for example, in play, and then it's Ion. So it is how, and it is a little bit when we first started, is how can we think of different temporalities at the very same time, because people are not, and this is again in that article of theirs, which is so powerful, that there is not, it is as if we all move in the same, in the same time line, according to the same speed, but some moves faster than others, right? But we've all put on the same timeline, on the same speed. And when you start thinking about how time is assumed in a lot of the kind of models we work with, for example, in education or in psychology, there was a very interesting discussion in my group on trauma and what are these binaries that we bring to these experiences or to our analysis already before we even start with our title here, as you say, the becoming literate is, what probably people that will pick up the book will think, oh yeah, that's interesting. When does someone become literate? So what is already assumed? And of course, you're troubled that, but that's the point, isn't it?
How do I add a box here or something?
Here, do we ever begin or end, or just start in the middle, or what instead?
I made
It's
your box
we
alone.
discussed
You
in
can
the
use this
group that
one.
I was in.
Yeah. Oh, could you say a little bit about that discussion? That's really interesting.
Yeah, is there someone from that group who'd like to to talk about it.
I
I
just
think,
I
yeah.
just brought it up as Deleuze says that
Yes.
we never really start. And so in research, just where do you start in research? And it comes back to what we were saying last week about creating research questions and having a plan and setting it up. According to Deleuze, you just always start in the middle. You never truly begin or end. And I think it has a lot to do with this temporality that we're talking about this week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I can bring it back to what we were just talking about, I find that writing and stop writing and the words, it creates a little bit of anxiety because writing in academia is the currency that counts. So how, and especially when we were talking about research ethics a few weeks ago, and how do you get through ethics if you're going to say it's not going to be writing? How do we get away from writing in academia?
Elizabeth, I've done that. If you want to have an answer to that, I would happily share that with you, although it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm working
wow.
on it now, but it's a pushback. Yeah, I'd love to hear that, Charlotte.
So have you got a written example?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got, yeah. So
I-
yeah, put it in the chat. That would be fantastic. You know, if you've got an example of that.
Yeah.
I can see there's a comment here. I can understand how our past affects our present and how the present can influence. Is it influence or something else? So let's get back to that. Can influence the future. However, I don't understand how the reverse is possible. How can the present can leave an influence on the past, for example? And that is very much at the heart of their notion of, it's not so much that it is a matter of influencing, but it's ontological. So that there are no points in time where one comes after the other, but that when we think about the past, that the past is not closed off. So it's each time we go back, we don't go back in the past, it was already closed off, but each time we go into the past, in fact, it's in the present. So so for example, Hillary's research on the book, Becoming Literate, is each time, together with the co-author, they look at the data or they continue with the writing, it's in the present, it's not in the past. Yeah, so there's a point here, you and your data are co-becoming. So it's thinking differently about what time is and how it works. I don't know whether
it's, if one thinks of a superposition, of the past, present, and the future all being together and not being separated, I think it's a little bit easier to imagine.
It might be interesting as well to pick, Karin, what you were saying, to pick that up in the session on memory.
Yeah, but that's the session with Acelia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
We could
pick up
get to
memory
quiz it
there.
place.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, that's a really good idea. So we have David, can you maybe say it? Because I'm aware of time, so I think otherwise some of these comments are going to be lost.
So just before you do that, Karin, your thing on no small matter, if you click on it, it comes up as garbage.
Ah, okay. So
Sorry, David.
so what I'll do is I'll share on the post
Well,
call WhatsApp,
chat.
actually the whole book by Anand Singh. And then what you'll see, there's a chapter there by Barad, which is what we were just, really helpful to discuss, which is can you separate the micro from the macro? So just because this counts for quantum mechanics or quantum field theory, does it really have anything to do with humans? And they're really, I like what they write about it in there. So that was when we were doing in our small group. David, would you mind talking to that?
Yes, sure. No, as we got onto this topic, I just wanted to share, people may have seen over the past few weeks, there's been some news from the physics world, which is quite an alien world to me, about time moving forward and backwards at the same time. And I thought, oh, that sounds familiar to us Baradians. So it's kind of popped up in mainstream science discourse. So I guess it's familiar to everyone here, but it's nice to see that these ideas get into the mainstream, really. Yeah. I think it was, yeah.
That's fascinating. And indeed, it's if you diffract that through that article that I will put up by Bharat about, you know, this is not just quantum reality, right? This is also like human reality, because we can't draw that line in the sand, as they say. Then yeah, so it is not so much influence, because that would be like time travel, wouldn't it? So the past is close, and then we would influence from now to the past, what's happening in the past, or, you know, or have a peak in the past, but that would already assume that the past is past, but it's already still part of the present. Your mind-boggling stuff.
Is.
Yeah, thanks. That looks fantastic. So maybe yeah, it would be good to put that as well. Hey, on and there's a lot to post on that group space. So watch out for all the articles that are going to be posted there later on. So if you thought you have nothing to do the coming weeks, then yeah. So Viv, shall we close the session?
Yeah.